There was a time when the Soviet Union didn't just dominate the world of chess. They owned it. For over 2 decades, every world champion had been Soviet. Every challenger had fallen, and the game itself had become a symbol of intellectual superiority in the middle of the Cold War. The United States wasn't supposed to compete here. No one from the West was. But then, one man appeared, unpredictable, obsessive, and unlike anyone the chess world had ever seen. And what he did in 1972 was so unexpected, so humiliating, that the Soviet Union began to question how this could even be possible. Today, a story you'll be proud to remember is about Bobby Fischer versus Boris Spassky.
And what's the pleasure? What's the moment of pleasure for you? Is it when you see the guy in trouble? Where's the greatest pleasure? What would correspond to hitting the home run in baseball?
The greatest pleasure. When you break his ego, this is where it's at.
By the late 1960s, the Soviet Union had achieved something in the world of chess that no nation in history had ever accomplished. For more than 20 years, every single world chess champion had been Soviet. Not just by coincidence, not just by talent, but by design. Chess inside the USSR was not merely a game, it was a state project. From an early age, children across the Soviet Union were identified, trained, and pushed into chess programs with the same seriousness that other countries reserved for science or military training. Chess clubs existed in schools, factories, military units, and universities. Grandmasters were treated like national heroes. Their victories were not personal achievements, they were proof that the Soviet system produced superior minds. To Soviet leadership, chess was the perfect weapon of propaganda. It required no guns, no bombs, no blood, just intelligence, strategy, calculation. And for decades, the message to the world had been clear. The smartest players on Earth were Soviet. World champions like Mikhail Botvinnik, Vasily Smyslov, Mikhail Tal, Tigran Petrosian, and eventually Boris Spassky had formed an unbroken line of dominance. Each defended the title against challengers from around the world, and each victory reinforced the same narrative. The West could compete in economics. It could compete in weapons. But on the intellectual battlefield of chess, it stood no chance. International tournaments began to feel predictable. If a Soviet player was in the final, the outcome felt inevitable. If multiple Soviets were present, they often worked together subtly, steering matches in ways that ensured one of their own would advance. It was not always obvious, but it was effective. The Soviet chess machine was coordinated, disciplined, and deeply political. By 1972, this dominance had lasted so long that it no longer felt like a streak. It felt like a law of nature. No American had ever seriously threatened it. In fact, the United States was barely present in elite chess conversations at all. The American chess scene was fragmented, underfunded, and treated mostly as a hobbyist pursuit. There was no system, no state support, no grand strategy. Just scattered enthusiasts and occasional talented players who rarely broke into the global elite. To the Soviets, this was expected. How could a country without a structured chess program, without a cultural obsession with the game, ever hope to challenge a system that had been refining players for decades? Chess, in their eyes, belonged to them. And then, quietly, without fanfare, without a team behind him, without a system supporting him, an American began climbing the rankings in a way that made no sense to anyone watching. Not just winning, dominating. And the Soviet chess establishment, for the first time in decades, began to notice something they had never had to consider before. A single player who did not fit into any system. A player they could not predict. A player who did not behave like the others. His name was Bobby Fischer. Robert James Fischer did not come from a system. He did not come from a school of grandmasters, a state program, or a culture built around chess. He came from a small apartment in Brooklyn, New York, raised by a single mother, largely alone, discovering the game by accident when he was 6 years old. His sister had bought a cheap chess set from a candy store. Bobby became obsessed with it almost immediately. There was no coach at first, no structured training. Just a boy sitting for hours, staring at pieces, trying to understand why certain moves worked and others did not. He played himself. He replayed games from books. He memorized patterns. He stopped caring about anything else. By the time he was a teenager, chess had become the only thing in his life that mattered. Fischer dropped out of school at 16. He had no interest in formal education. His mother worried constantly, but Bobby had already decided what he was going to do. He was going to become the best chess player in the world, not as a dream, as a certainty. Those who met him described the same traits: brilliant, obsessive, socially distant, intensely focused, and often difficult. He did not behave like other prodigies. He did not seek praise. He did not enjoy tournaments. He did not make friends easily. He simply wanted to win. At 13, he played what would later be called the game of the century, defeating Master Donald Byrne with a combination so creative and aggressive that experienced players struggled to believe it had come from a child. The chess world began to pay attention. At 14, he became the youngest U.S. champion in history. At 15, he became the youngest grandmaster in the world at the time. But what made Fischer different was not just talent. It was the way he approached the game. He studied openings for hours every day. He memorized entire games from history. He developed an understanding of positions that felt almost intuitive. While others relied on preparation from coaches and teams, Fischer worked alone, building his own understanding from the ground up. He didn't trust others. He didn't want help. He believed he could outthink anyone by himself. This independence was unusual in chess. At the highest levels, players often relied on seconds, assistants, and analysis teams. Fischer rejected all of that. He prepared alone, convinced that no one else could match his intensity. By the late 1960s, he had begun entering international tournaments against Soviet grandmasters, and something strange started happening. He wasn't just competing with them, he was beating them. Cleanly, decisively, repeatedly. To Soviet observers, this was unsettling. They were used to facing Western players who were talented but inconsistent, creative but unstructured. Fischer was different. He played with the precision of a machine and the aggression of someone who had nothing to lose. He also had something else the Soviets did not know how to handle. He didn't behave predictably. He complained about lighting, about noise, about cameras, about prize money. He threatened to withdraw from tournaments. He argued with organizers. He made demands that seemed unreasonable. Many saw him as unstable, difficult, eccentric. But beneath all of that was a simple truth. When he sat at the board, he became almost unstoppable. And slowly, the Soviet chess establishment began to realize that this strange, solitary American was not going away. He was getting closer to something they had protected for decades: the World Championship. By the early 1970s, the Cold War had reached into nearly every aspect of global life. Space exploration, nuclear weapons, Olympic medals, scientific achievements. Every victory, no matter how small, was framed as proof that one system was superior to the other. Capitalism versus communism, freedom versus control, East versus West. Chess quietly had become one of the most symbolic arenas of this conflict. To the Soviet Union, chess was not a hobby or a sport. It was intellectual warfare. The consistent dominance of Soviet grandmasters on the world stage served as a constant reminder that the USSR believed it produced the sharpest minds on Earth. Soviet newspapers celebrated chess victories with the same pride reserved for military or scientific achievements. When a Soviet player defeated a Western opponent, it was reported as more than a game. It was proof of ideological superiority. For decades, no one had seriously challenged this narrative. But Bobby Fischer's rise disrupted something carefully maintained. His victories over Soviet grandmasters were not isolated upsets. They were systematic, decisive, and increasingly frequent. And because he was American, every one of those wins carried political weight. Suddenly, a game that most people considered quiet and intellectual was being watched with the tension of a military standoff. Western media began to notice. Headlines that once ignored chess now highlighted Fischer's progress. Articles described him not just as a talented player, but as a lone American challenging the entire Soviet chess empire. He became a symbol, whether he liked it or not. Fischer himself did not speak in political terms. He rarely discussed ideology. He did not see himself as a representative of the United States. He simply wanted to win. But the world around him had already turned his journey into something much larger. The Soviets felt it too. Inside Soviet chess circles, discussions about Fischer became increasingly serious. He was studied. His games were analyzed in detail. Grandmasters prepared specifically for him. They tried to understand how a single American without a state system, without a team of trainers, could consistently outplay players who had been raised in a national program designed for this exact purpose. It didn't make sense, and that made it dangerous because if Fischer could challenge Soviet dominance in chess, the symbolic implications were enormous. It suggested that the carefully built narrative of intellectual superiority might not be as secure as it seemed. By the time Fischer began advancing through the qualification matches for the World Championship, the tension was no longer subtle. This was no longer just a tournament. This was becoming a confrontation the Soviet Union could not afford to lose. And for the first time in decades, the possibility of a non-Soviet world champion in chess felt real. To reach the World Chess Championship, a challenger had to survive a brutal series of qualifying matches against the best players on Earth. These were not short tournaments. They were long, exhausting duels between grandmasters who had spent their lives studying every possible move, every variation, every psychological angle of the game. And in 1970 to 1971, Bobby Fischer did something that stunned the entire chess world. And he didn't just win, he destroyed everyone in front of him. In the interzonal tournament in Palma de Mallorca, Fischer dominated the field with a performance so strong that observers began to suspect something unusual was happening. He played with confidence, speed, and clarity that seemed almost unfair. Experienced grandmasters struggled to understand how he could see so far ahead in complex positions with such ease. But what happened next was even more shocking. In the candidates' matches, the final stage before the World Championship, Fischer faced a lineup of elite Soviet and European grandmasters. These were players who had spent decades competing at the highest level. Men who had trained inside the Soviet chess machine, men who had defeated world champions. Fischer crushed them. He defeated Mark Taimanov of the Soviet Union by the unheard-of score of 6-0. Not a single draw, not a single loss. Taimanov returned to Moscow humiliated. Soviet officials were furious. How could a grandmaster be defeated so completely by one man? Then Fischer faced Bent Larsen, one of the strongest Western players in the world, another 6-0. Two consecutive world-class opponents defeated without conceding a single point. It was unprecedented. Commentators began using words like impossible and inhuman. Even Fischer's critics admitted they had never seen anything like it. Finally, he faced former world champion Tigran Petrosian, a defensive genius known for his ability to avoid defeat under any circumstance. Fischer beat him convincingly as well. By the time these matches ended, the message was unmistakable. Fischer was not just playing well, he was playing at a level the chess world had never witnessed before. As Soviet analysts pored over his games in disbelief, they searched for mistakes, for patterns, for weaknesses. But what they found instead was clarity, precision, and an aggressive style that forced opponents into positions they had never prepared for. He played alone, without assistance, without coaches, relying only on his own preparation. Meanwhile, Soviet players had entire teams analyzing Fischer's games day and night, and still, they could not stop him. For the first time in decades, the Soviet chess establishment faced a reality it had never considered. A challenger who was not intimidated, not out-prepared, and not impressed by their reputation. As Fischer advanced toward the World Championship match against Boris Spassky, the defending Soviet champion, the tension surrounding the event began to build worldwide. Because now, this was no longer theoretical. An American was about to sit across from a Soviet world champion for the most important chess match in history. The World Chess Championship of 1972 was set to take place in Reykjavik, Iceland, a neutral location chosen precisely because of the political weight surrounding the match. By this point, the event had grown far beyond the chess community. Newspapers around the world were covering it as if it were a diplomatic summit. Television crews arrived, journalists crowded the venue, politicians paid attention. Because this was no longer just about chess. This was the Cold War sitting across a table from itself. On one side was Boris Spassky, the reigning world champion, representing the Soviet Union's decades-long dominance. Calm, composed, disciplined, and backed by a full team of Soviet analysts and trainers. On the other side was Bobby Fischer, alone. But before a single move was played, Fischer did something that shocked everyone. He threatened not to come. Fischer began making demands that to organizers seemed impossible. He complained about prize money, he complained about cameras, he complained about lighting, the chairs, the table, the noise in the room. At one point, he simply refused to board the plane to Iceland. The match was on the verge of collapsing before it even started. Soviet officials watched this unfold with a mix of confusion and disbelief. They had prepared for a chess match. What they were witnessing felt like psychological chaos. Fischer's behavior appeared erratic, unreasonable, even self-destructive, but something else was happening beneath the surface. Every delay, every demand, every threat to withdraw was putting enormous pressure on the Soviet side. Spassky had arrived in Reykjavik ready to defend his title. Instead, he was forced to wait, uncertain if the match would even happen. The entire world was watching, and the American challenger seemed completely unpredictable. Eventually, after intervention from organizers and even a phone call from U.S. officials encouraging Fischer to go, he boarded the plane at the last possible moment. He arrived in Reykjavik late, tense, and already at odds with everyone around him. The stage was set, but not in the way anyone expected. Spassky entered the hall calm and prepared. Fischer entered restless, suspicious, and demanding. And before the first piece was moved, the psychological battle had already begun. When the match finally began, it did not start the way anyone expected. In Game 1, Bobby Fischer made a move so strange, so uncharacteristically reckless that spectators could hardly believe what they were seeing. In a position that most grandmasters would have calmly defended to a draw, Fischer played an aggressive move with his bishop that allowed Boris Spassky to trap the piece. It was a mistake that did not fit the precision Fischer had displayed for the past 2 years. He lost the game. For the Soviet side, this was reassuring. Perhaps Fischer's strange behavior in the days before the match had finally caught up with him. Perhaps the pressure was too much. Perhaps the American genius was unraveling at the worst possible moment. But what happened next was even more shocking. Fischer refused to show up for Game 2. He claimed the television cameras were distracting him. He demanded they be removed. Organizers refused. Fischer did not sit at the board. The clock ran out. Spassky was awarded the win by forfeit. The score was now 2-0 in favor of the Soviet champion, without Spassky having to fight for the second point. Around the world, observers assumed the match was already over. Commentators began speculating that Fischer might withdraw entirely. The Soviets were confident. They had regained control without having to outplay him. But behind the scenes, something subtle was happening. Spassky did not celebrate. He did not appear relaxed. Instead, he seemed uneasy. Because Fischer's behavior, irrational as it appeared, was destabilizing the entire environment. The match was no longer proceeding in a predictable, orderly fashion. It felt chaotic, uncertain. And that uncertainty began to affect Spassky. Finally, after intense negotiations, a compromise was reached. Game 3 would be played in a small, isolated room, away from the main hall, without cameras, without an audience, and under conditions that Fischer demanded. Spassky agreed. And in doing so, he unknowingly stepped into the moment where the entire match would begin to change. Because Game 3 would not just be another chess game. It would be the point where Bobby Fischer stopped reacting to the pressure and started creating it. Game 3 of the World Chess Championship was not played in the main hall. It was moved to a small, isolated room backstage, away from cameras, away from the audience, and away from the formal setting everyone had expected. 2 chairs, 1 table, silence. For Bobby Fischer, this was exactly what he wanted. For Boris Spassky, it was something else entirely. Spassky had been the calm, composed champion up to this point. He had followed the rules, trusted the structure of the event, and relied on the confidence built from years of Soviet dominance. But now he was sitting in a strange room, under unusual conditions because his opponent had demanded it. The environment no longer felt familiar, and in chess, familiarity is comfort. From the first moves of Game 3, something was different. Fischer did not play cautiously. He did not try to recover slowly from the 2-0 deficit. He played with aggression, confidence, and clarity, the same style that had crushed Taimanov and Larsen. Spassky began to make small inaccuracies, nothing obvious, nothing dramatic. But Fischer sensed it immediately. He pressed harder. The position became uncomfortable. Then worse. Then lost. Fischer won. The score was now 2-1, but the psychological balance of the match had shifted far more than the numbers suggested, because Spassky had just lost to Fischer in an environment completely controlled by Fischer. Game 4 returned to the main hall, but the tension was different now. Fischer carried himself with new confidence. Spassky, for the first time, seemed uncertain. The match no longer felt like a formality for the Soviet champion, it felt like a struggle. Over the next games, Fischer continued applying relentless pressure. His preparation was deep. His moves were precise. Spassky began spending more time at the board, thinking longer, searching for clarity that wasn't coming. Then came Game 6, a game that would later be considered one of the greatest ever played. Fischer, playing white, executed a masterpiece of positional play. Every move seemed to restrict Spassky further. The Soviet champion, known for his defensive skill, found himself slowly suffocated. There were no tactics, no tricks, just pure, overwhelming control. When the game ended, something extraordinary happened. Boris Spassky stood up and applauded. He applauded Fischer in front of the audience, a Soviet world champion applauding an American challenger. It was a moment no one in the chess world had ever seen before, and in that quiet gesture, something became clear. Spassky no longer felt like the dominant player in the match. He felt like the one trying to survive it. After Game 6, the atmosphere around the match changed completely. Up to that point, Soviet officials had treated the situation as manageable. Fischer's behavior was strange, but Spassky was still in control. The early 2-0 lead had reinforced their belief that order would eventually return and the match would settle into a predictable rhythm. But Game 6 broke that illusion. It was not just a loss, it was a demonstration, a statement that Fischer was playing at a level Spassky could not comfortably match. And when Spassky applauded, it sent a quiet but devastating message back to Moscow. Their champion was impressed. That was not supposed to happen. Behind the scenes, pressure began to mount. Soviet analysts worked frantically to prepare new strategies. They reviewed Fischer's openings, searched for weaknesses, and tried to regain control of the narrative. But something unusual was happening that no amount of preparation could fix. Spassky was beginning to doubt himself. In chess at the highest level, confidence is invisible but essential. A player must believe that their understanding of the position is correct, that their preparation will hold, that their opponent can be handled. Fischer was dismantling that belief piece by piece. Games that should have ended in draws began slipping away. Positions that Spassky would normally defend comfortably became complicated and uncomfortable. He began taking longer to make decisions. He started avoiding complex lines, choosing safer positions that only allowed Fischer to press further. The Soviet machine, the coordinated system that had protected its champions for decades, was now facing something it could not control: the psychology of one man across the board. Fischer's presence was relentless, and he stared at the board with intensity. He played quickly when confident, slowly when calculating. He radiated the sense that he saw more than his opponent. And Spassky felt it. By the middle of the match, the score had flipped. Fischer was leading. For the first time in over 20 years, a Soviet world champion was behind in a title defense against a non-Soviet player. Moscow watched with growing alarm. Messages were sent, advice was given, but none of it reached the place where the battle was now being fought. Inside Spassky's mind. The match had stopped being about chess theory. It had become a test of mental endurance, and Fischer was winning. As the match entered its final stretch, the tension in Reykjavik became almost unbearable. Every move was watched by millions around the world. Newspapers printed chess diagrams on their front pages. Radio broadcasts described positions move by move. For the first time in history, a chess match felt like a global event. And on the board, something irreversible had happened. Bobby Fischer was in control. Spassky still fought. He still searched for chances, but the energy had shifted. Fischer played with calm certainty, while Spassky looked increasingly exhausted by the effort of simply keeping up. Games that once would have felt manageable now drained him completely. The Soviet champion was no longer defending a title. He was trying to stop the inevitable. And then came the final games. Fischer did not need to win dramatically. He did not need a brilliant finish. He only needed to maintain his lead and apply steady pressure. And that is exactly what he did. Move by move, game by game, he closed in on the score required to claim the championship. Finally, the moment arrived. Spassky looked at the board, studied the position, and understood that there was no path forward, no hidden resource, no miracle defense, just the quiet reality that he had been outplayed. He stood up. He extended his hand. And he resigned. There was no anger, no protest, no excuse, just acceptance. In that handshake, the Soviet Union's 2-decade grip on the World Chess Championship ended. An American, sitting alone without a team, without a system, had defeated the most powerful chess establishment in the world. The room was silent for a moment before applause filled the air. Not just for Fischer, but for the end of something no one thought could end. When Bobby Fischer stood up as the new world chess champion in 1972, the result traveled far beyond Reykjavik. It crossed oceans, borders, and political lines almost instantly. Newspapers around the world did not report it as a sports story. They reported it as a historic event, because everyone understood what had just happened. For over 20 years, the Soviet Union had used chess as quiet proof of intellectual superiority. The unbroken line of Soviet champions had become part of the Cold War narrative. It suggested that the Soviet system produced sharper minds, deeper thinkers, better strategists. And in a single match, that narrative had collapsed. Not because of a team, not because of a program, not because of a system, but because of one man. An American who had learned the game alone in a Brooklyn apartment had defeated the entire Soviet chess empire on the world's most visible stage. Inside the Soviet Union, the impact was immediate and uncomfortable. Officials could not dismiss the loss. They could not hide it. The entire world had watched. Soviet grandmasters began re-examining how they trained, how they prepared, how they thought about the game. The aura of inevitability was gone. For the first time in decades, the Soviet chess machine had been forced to confront a reality it had never faced before. It could be beaten. In the United States, Fischer became an overnight symbol of intellectual triumph. People who had never followed chess suddenly knew his name. The match was replayed in newspapers and magazines as if it were a military victory. It wasn't just pride in a champion. It was pride in what his victory represented. Proof that the impossible could happen. Proof that dominance, no matter how long it lasts, is never permanent. Proof that even the most established systems can be shaken by a single, determined individual. And long after the pieces were put away and the board was cleared, the memory of that match remained powerful. Because it wasn't just about chess. It was about the moment an empire realized that its control over a symbol of superiority had slipped away in front of the entire world. For weeks, in 1972, the world watched two men sit across a chessboard in silence, moving pieces of wood across 64 squares. But what unfolded in Reykjavik was far greater than a game. It was the moment a system that had dominated for decades was forced to confront something it had never faced before: unpredictability, individuality, and a level of brilliance that did not come from a program, but from one determined mind. Bobby Fischer did not just win a championship, he broke the certainty that the Soviet Union had built around chess, and in doing so, reminded the world that even the strongest empires can be shaken by a single person who refuses to accept the limits placed in front of him. I hope the pride of remembering this story makes you want to experience many more stories like this one. If it did, you're more than welcome to be part of this journey by subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. And that's why this is a story to be proud of.